Let's talk about how you write an introduction for a text analysis response. Now, since this is just a response, your introduction doesn't need to be as developed as if it were a full essay. So it's going to be pretty simple and straightforward. There are essentially two things we have to introduce in the introduction to a text analysis response. We have to introduce the central idea, and we have to introduce the writing strategy. And since this response is meant to talk about the way the author wrote the passage, you kind of need to include the author in there. The author is the one doing this, and that needs to be reflected in your thesis. Okay, so here's the outline for the introduction. We're focused on this. So it's brief. First sentence: provide context for the speech or passage. Now, you could get nonfiction or you could get fiction. If it's a speech, which they seem to give a lot, then it's very simple. Just who's giving the speech, when are they giving the speech, why are they giving the speech? Bam, done. If it's fiction, it's a little harder. You probably want to lead into your central idea without giving away the central idea, because that'll be down here. So you just need to sort of nudge the reader toward what your central idea will be. Or you can provide some context for the passage by saying what's going on. That's another option. Then in the second sentence, that will be your thesis, where you connect the author's use of a literary element to the central idea. For example, author uses writing strategy to illustrate central idea. So obviously you plug in the things there. Now this is not the only construction that will work, but it is one that does. If you wanted to say, to illustrate central idea, so-and-so uses blah, 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 that would be fine too. Like you can, and obviously you don't have to use the word illustrate. There are plenty of other options besides illustrate. However, you need to have a sentence that does these things in it. It needs to have those ideas, and it needs to be clear. Now, the passage I wrote about has to do with a young girl who is blind, and her father works at a museum. And it's all about how she approaches the world with her limitations. So let's see where I went. Now, for my first sentence, I went with a sentence that leads into the central idea. If I wanted to provide context instead, I could have had a sentence like, in All the Light You Cannot See by Anthony Doerr, a young blind girl learns to navigate the world in the museum at which her father works, or something like that. But I wanted to lead into the central idea. So I put, the world sometimes puts obstacles in front of people, obstacles that are intimidating and seem impossible to overcome. Because I knew I was going to be dealing with her blindness, and I knew that in the end of the passage, she seems like she's such a strong character that this idea of overcoming was going to be a big part of it. So I'm just sort of nudging the reader in the direction that I'm going to go before I hit them with the actual central idea in my thesis. So my thesis says, but Anthony Doerr uses characterization to demonstrate that even the most insurmountable obstacles can be conquered with curiosity and ambition. So here is my writing strategy. And then this is my central idea. And obviously I've got the author there. I knew that all my examples of characterization point to those two things, so I'm including them in my thesis so that the reader has a very clear idea of where I'm going to go. But I've checked all the boxes. I've got the author using this writing strategy to illustrate this central idea. And now my main idea is clear to the reader. And that's all. In the next video, we'll take a look at the first analysis paragraph, which is where the real work begins.